This is Booking It to Financial Freedom, show number 30. If you find yourself in the majority, that's your cue to step back and reevaluate what's going on, because chances are something needs to change.
Look at what you're currently doing and ask yourself, what would happen if I did the opposite of the people around me? What will I sacrifice if I continue on this track for 5, 10, 20 years? There's so many people that would never live outside of that world. It's just too scary for them. So it can be hard to kind of have the courage to be the person that does live differently.
So I think if you're the type of person or finding yourself listening to this book or reading it or are in a position and you start to ask yourself these questions, you probably are the person who needs to make a change in your life.
Welcome to Booking It to Financial Freedom, where we explore literature from some of the most successful experts in their field to help you build a blueprint for personal growth and financial freedom. Join us as we examine a new book every month and break down key concepts to help you get out of the rat race and on track to start building a life better than you ever imagined.
Hey everyone, I'm your host, Amanda Schneider, realtor and investor, and I'm here with my co-host and teammate, Jamie Booth. Hey, Jamie.
Hey, Amanda, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm tired.
Yeah, you had a long weekend.
I did. I had a long but very amazing weekend. I finally got out and climbed Pikes Peak. And more Lord, I'm so tired I can't even talk.
Right?
Yeah, so it was an awesome time. Me, a couple buddies, his daughter. So,
nice.
Yeah, that was an extraordinary accomplishment for her as well. She's only 11 and she did it.
Wow. And she was able to keep up with you guys.
Yeah. She went through a couple periods where she was, you could tell she was pretty tired, but she knocked it out. So, yeah.
That's great.
We had started up 5 a.m. on Saturday, got up into camp a little bit early afternoon. And it really worked out too, because one of the guys that I was with, he worked for a long time in wildlife rescue or like recovery and stuff. So search and rescue, whatever. And at one point he was on a high altitude rescue and succumbed to like acute elevation sickness.
Yeah.
Had to be medevaced himself. So he's sensitive to it. So we were able to chill out that day, the first night at like 12,000 feet on the side of the mountain. Absolutely gorgeous camp, beautiful views, beautiful sunset the next day or sunrise. And then knock out the last couple thousand feet of elevation and make it to the peak, by noon the next morning. So wonderful time. It was great, and super rewarding for sure.
Yeah. Do you have someone pick you up then at the top?
Oh, what we did is, because, walking down is horrible. Yeah, we took the cog.
Okay.
And if anybody's listening and is interested in doing what we did, the cog will let you go down for half price from the top if you're a climber. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, so it's a good deal.
Yeah.
Great deal.
I've never done that route. So for those of you that, aren't from here, there's 2 different routes you could do. What you did is considered the front side, right?
Yeah, the bar trail side.
Bar trail. Yeah. And I've done the back side, which it's shorter up to the top, but then we also went down. It's easier down. So it's easier up and down. So if you only go up the front side, it's the same mileage about if you do the back side up and down, but it's easier. I mean, it's still hard.
Yeah, it's still hard. It was like
still hard.
It was right around 12 or 13 miles, and starting at the bar trail parking lot, it's we did a little over 7,000 feet of elevation gain in 2 days.
That's what I'm saying. Is I think the front side is a lot harder climb. However it's structured, it's obviously because up is only 6 on the backside, but then you go back down.
Yeah.
So.
And then also for anybody that's sitting out there and listening to this and thinking about doing it, like none of it's technical either. So it's not like you're doing any rock climbing or there's really, I'm trying to think, I don't want to stick my foot in my mouth, but I don't think there was even really any place you could really fall and die kind of scenarios. Yeah. The trail's really well maintained. It's not technical at all. It's just a lot of up. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but it's definitely something worth doing.
Yeah. And then you want to kind of share, after reading this book and just kind of the motivation that you've been getting from this book, what you've been doing?
Yeah, we were talking before we started recording about how motivational this book is. Like, you have a story, and then, like for me, I've been thinking about the possibility of buying some properties overseas, specifically in England, as like a vacation rental. So I'll have somewhere, because I have 2 daughters that live in England, so I want to have a place like to go to when I see them. So that, and then I also want a vacation rental like in Belize or something like that. So I want to be able to be mobile in that manner. So it's really lit a fire under my butt to to start doing that. And I immediately started reaching out to the contacts that I have in England. So I've already got a couple agents on the ground, like they're ready to help me out, all this other stuff. So super motivating to, finally try to start implementing some of these tactics that this book will make you motivated for.
Mm-hmm. What I love about that too is we're going to talk a lot about like fear and kind of overcoming fear in this episode. And for me, immediately when you talk about buying something overseas, I'm like, oh my gosh, how are you going to do that? Because I'm so unfamiliar with it. Just, how do you get a loan for something overseas? How does any of that work? So, but you've lived there. So you're very familiar with, the country and the community, and you've all those ties that can help you through all of that.
Yeah, I have an advantage that way because I did live in England for almost 10 years. I also would like to get eventually probably a rental place in Guam as well, because I love that island, and I would love to have something to give me a reason to periodically go back, because it's a great place to go. And so being able to take advantage of some of the experiences that I have under my belt is definitely good.
Yeah, that's great.
You got some stuff that you were kind of motivated, that this book has kind of pushed you to as well, right?
So Lindsay and I have talked about a few different things that just kind of, once reading this book, I'm like, wow, we can basically combine all of those things to potentially be a really neat experience, kind of a mini retirement like we were talking about in the first episode. So we have two properties that are single families that our tenants just moved out of that we're going to 1031, and we've owned them for a few years. So they've got quite a bit of equity. So we're going to 1031 into hopefully a larger, like a medium-sized multifamily, so like 10 to 15, 20 units. But once we do that and we sell both of those, my VA home loan will be free, completely free. So that means, whatever we can afford, we can buy with the VA home loan and no money down. So our idea is, well, we don't really want to buy another house here. We love our house in Colorado Springs. We're not going to sell that. So why wouldn't we move somewhere for a year? That's now our new primary residence, and use the VA home loan there, because it has to be your primary. So we're kind of considering that, and then maybe also buying an RV to travel. So wherever we would move to for a year, buying an RV and being able to see some of those areas in our RV, bring our dog who's getting older, and just doing that mini retirement. Because what's cool about our job is a lot of it can be done remotely, especially that we have a team. So, I have you and Colleen and eventually Savannah that'll join the team. And so you guys will be here boots on the ground to be able to do those showings, listings, things like that, while I'm helping marketing and talking to the clients. So it's kind of a neat thing to think about.
I think this would be a good idea, or a good opportunity to do a little bit of education in the real estate world,
Right.
So by freeing up your VA loan and moving into a new primary, you'll still have your house here in Colorado Springs. So tell the audience what, you don't necessarily have to be there 100% of the time to be considered your primary full-time resident.
Right.
So you'll be able to come back to Colorado Springs and spend some, a few weeks here and there in your home that you have now and love, right?
Yeah. So what we will probably do is rent our current home completely furnished, probably for a year. But we will take some trips in the RV where we'll be gone for weeks at a time. But the thing that really matters to the lender is that the intent is that to be our primary, and it will be our primary. It'll be our base of operation, because our house here will be rented. And so even if we're gone a month or two at a time traveling in our RV, that house is our primary. It's our only thing that we own as our primary, if that makes sense.
So anybody out there who's VA eligible, this could be a strategy just to, what if you did this? So for, someone who wants to start investing and building a portfolio, what if you did this like 4 years in a row? Bought a new house in a new location, did some more traveling, if your lifestyle could, accommodate that. And
I will tell you, the one caveat is, because I had to talk to our lender about this, is that your job, because we'll need to count my income to qualify for a loan. So I have to show that I can and have had experience being a remote worker. So for me, it'll work because we've had our team. So I've had agents working on my team now for a year and a half. So I'll be able to show that I have a team. I make some income from that team. So if this is something you want to do, or you want to buy a new primary in different locations, make sure you're starting to establish that you are a remote worker. That will be super important to your lender. So just know that. Yeah.
Income, proof of income can be a problem sometimes. A good example is I have a client right now who came from overseas, and he's required to show, a couple years of income, and one of the place that was keeping the records of his income got destroyed. So, stuff like that can be an interesting hiccup when it comes to being able to employ some tactics. But
yeah, for sure. Yeah. Cool. Well, I think we'll go ahead and get into this. We're going to talk kind of a lot about just some obstacles today and overcoming fears. So
yeah, let's get into it.
Okay. So he's got a subchapter here called Everything Popular is Wrong. I love this. He first starts out by saying basically because so many people are going to be fearful to do this. It's going to be really scary for them to think about taking these mini retirements, taking time off work, maybe even quitting your job completely. If you have kiddos, that makes it even harder. But he says the worst case scenario is that you actually do have retirement. So the worst case scenario is it doesn't work and now you're just doing what you were doing before and you just keep working until retirement. Well, why wouldn't you at least try to do this and see how it works? I have a kind of a funny story. We have some tenants that rented from us last year, and they tried this in Costa Rica. They have 3 boys, and they tried to move down there and move their family and everything, super excited about it. They tried it for 3 months and it didn't work. It doesn't mean they're never going to try that again. It's just that specific scenario didn't work. So the worst case is it doesn't work. You come back and you live the life you were living and you try it again,
Yeah, I don't know if you got it in the show notes here, but he was talking about, if you were to completely change, your paradigm as far as what your life. So if you're like a certified nurse or whatever, and you go try something completely new, you have to ask yourself, okay, if that fails, what is it really going to cost me in the end to like jump back into what my default career was? Like, is it really going to be that hard to get back in and start making money off of what I already know? And most of the time the answer is no, it's not a huge hurdle to try to get over, to get, to have that fallback to go back into what you were doing beforehand. So, like an example you just use, your clients went out, they didn't work out for them, they come back, regroup, rethink a new strategy, and go do it again. So it's just wonderful.
So the worst case is it doesn't work out. The best case is it does work out. It's amazing. You have all the money you need to live the lifestyle you want to, and now you've completely changed your and your family's life. Like, to me, the possibility of that is totally worth any kind of risk.
Yeah. I wish I would have wrote down the quote, because there was a quote that I really liked that pertained to this one, everything popular is wrong. And there was somebody, it was, I don't know if it was Washington or Abraham Lincoln or somebody. They said, if you find yourself in the majority, you need to, that's your cue to step back and reevaluate what's going on, because chances are something needs to change. So absolutely.
I think a lot of it is just having confidence in yourself and your skills. That's something I've never been afraid of, where my next dollar is going to come from, especially like when I quit my job and I'm doing real estate full time. And even before I met Lindsay, when I was traveling a lot and doing stuff, just because I know I'm a hard worker and I have that faith in myself that if I have to bartend and I have to work 2 jobs just to survive until I figure out the next step, like I can always do that. So having that confidence in yourself. Another thing he talks about is, and we've heard this is a common theme through a couple books, is that interest and energy are cyclical. So not only do we get bored, some of us get bored pretty easily, our energy is also cyclical. So by doing some of these mini retirements, you are coming back refreshed and ready to really take on new tasks. And I think that was in the one thing for sure. I know it was probably in some of the other books we read about just the importance of rest and relaxation and doing something you're passionate about. And the same with just your interests in general. I know that one of the reasons I always hated working in an office is because the first couple weeks is exciting because you're learning something new, and then it just becomes the same thing day in and day out, and that's tough. So,
one of the other things you can play with this, with the mini retirement, is, also gives you motivation for the next one. So you get out there, you get your reset, we go do your 2 or 3 week, remote vacation, come back. And then you start planning the next one. So, that might be 6 months down the road, but you already have it in place. So now, you're motivated to do the tasks that you have to do leading up to the next adventure. So, just, like it's the cyclical, in and out of your workflow and all that stuff, and resetting it. And then, you might go out, hit that vacation, come back with a completely different, idea of what you want to be doing.
Right.
So.
Well, and that's the thing too, is that not everybody wants to just go lay on the beach for 6 months. Like, that's not the point of what he's saying here. And that kind of brings us into his next topic, which is less is not laziness. So by trying to find ways to do things more efficiently does not mean you're lazy. That's, I am somebody who has a lot of energy and I like to be doing things. So I would not do well on a beach for 6 months, but this is about being able to decide what I want to do with my time, not being obligated by somebody else's priorities.
Yeah. And less doesn't necessarily mean that you're producing less. It's that you're using less energy. So if you can find a way to streamline whatever it is you're doing for 40 hours a week and literally accomplish the exact same workload by doing it for 4 hours of work, why in God's name would you continue doing it the way you are now,
Yes.
So yeah, it's not about producing less, it's about being more efficient.
Agreed. All right, and he also talks about the timing is never right. So the timing is never going to be right to do this. Someday is a disease that takes your dreams, he says. So you just have to eventually find the time and say, this is the date, and we're just doing this. Like, if you keep putting it off, then you're going to wake up and you're 65 and maybe you have a health condition or something is preventing you from ever doing it. So just now is the time.
Yep, exactly. You can't keep saying next year I'll do this, next year I'll do that, because next thing you know, there's going to be 10 years is going to slip by and you're probably going to have hip problems and not be able to do it, do whatever it was you wanted to do.
Exactly. He also says that you should ask for forgiveness, not permission. So, take some of this with a grain of salt because we don't know who your boss is or what your job situation is like. But he gives some examples where you try to maybe work remotely and then your boss doesn't like it. So you ask for forgiveness, but you show them that you were actually more productive when you were working remotely, et cetera. But the point is that not being always tied around what everyone else thinks and asking for permission, just ask for forgiveness.
Yeah. I think there's one good I don't know if it was in this book or it was something else, but where the guy said, take like 3 days of sick leave or 2 days of sick leave or something like that. And then go home and then like work your butt off as if you were allowed to work remotely, and then come back and be like, look, this is what I did from home, So that's kind of like the ask for forgiveness.
Yeah.
Like, I called off sick, but look what I was able to accomplish while I was home sick. So why can't I do this for a couple of days a week anyway?
Yeah. Exactly. So. And I think he was saying too that no is kind of the default answer for a lot of people. So it's an emotional response. So when you're asking for permission, a lot of times just automatically no, where it's easier to prove that you did something and then ask for forgiveness. Emphasize strengths instead of fixing weaknesses. So we have already kind of talked about this, but again, finding those things that are functioning well and focusing on those instead of trying to fix everything that's wrong. Like those things and those people in your life, they probably just need to be, they're probably the 80% that you just need to say goodbye to and focus on the things that are working.
Yeah, these are the things that you're probably procrastinating on. We've talked about this in the past where, what was it? If you find yourself procrastinating a task, it's your conscious telling you that you probably shouldn't be doing it.
Yes.
So instead of wasting all of your time trying to become better at a task that you don't like to do, just outsource it and stick to what you know.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to skip this other one because we already talked about it. Money alone is not the solution. So we've talked about that one too. That is truly not about the amount of money, because money is often a scapegoat. It's an excuse to keep working, to keep doing things. But it's truly how you want to live your life and how you're going to spend your money. It's not the number itself.
And we've talked about this a million times before too. More money doesn't mean more happiness. And more money doesn't mean that you're going to be better at money. If you're already struggling with happiness with what you have, if you're already struggling with the money that you do have, you're very foolish to think that if you get millions more dollars, then suddenly all of your problems are going to be fixed, because basically you're just going to have bigger problems. It's not going to work out the way you think it is.
Yes, absolutely. And he distinguishes between relative income and absolute income. So absolute income is measured by just, one holy and almighty dollar of this is how much money I have. But relative income is, do I have enough income to support the lifestyle I want to live?
Yeah. It goes back to the example we talked about where the guy had a $500,000 job.
Yes.
That's the absolute income. and the guy with $40,000 a year, but with all the freedom in the world, he's got the relative income. So who's more wealthy in that situation?
He brings up an interesting point too, where he's talking about the difference of distress and eustress, I think is how you would pronounce it. How, we like to say that stress is bad, but that's not the case. Not all stress is bad. And the new rich we're not aiming to eliminate all stress in our life. Again, we're not just wanting to lay on the beach and not do anything, but we want the good stress. We want the mental stress of, how do I continue to earn the same amount of money, but cut down on the hours that I work? Who can I bring in to help do some of these things for us? Who are some role models that are pushing me to exceed my limits? That's the kind of good stress we want, not the stress of 40 hours a week working just for work's sake.
Yeah. The kind of stress that makes you sick.
Yep. There's a quote in the book that I love, because he's talking about fear and kind of being able to escape the paralysis of maybe never implementing something like this. And this is a quote from Mark Twain. I'm an old man and have known a great many troubles, but most of them never happened.
Yeah, so, I love that one too.
Yeah. So obviously the fear of the unknown, it's going to be a major obstacle. He talks a lot in the book about people with children. He gave one specific example of a woman who was just constantly afraid of things that could happen while she was traveling with her kids. And so she went through different things to prepare them, like memorize the itinerary. She would make it fun and quiz them and do all that stuff. And obviously none of that happened, but sometimes, especially in the beginning, we have to over-prepare to make ourselves feel good. But once we actually take that step and we're there and we realize, okay, things are not as bad, that can really help alleviate that stress. It's just the fear of the unknown.
Yeah, I don't know how many times I've been scared to do something or jump into something, and then once I've done it, I'm like, oh,
yes,
well, that was easy.
Yes.
What the heck was I scared about?
Yes, yeah. I think it's remembering all of those times in our life that's happened, and just knowing that you can always go back, like you can set a plan to go overseas. If you're there for a week and you hate it, things are going terribly, you can always come back. That's how I get over a lot of those fears. Let's see. Oh, this is a good quote too. There's no difference between a pessimist who says, oh, it's hopeless, so don't bother doing anything, and an optimist who says, don't bother doing anything, it's going to turn out fine anyway. Either way, nothing happens. So uncovering fear that's actually disguised as optimism, which is like another something to get over, because you'll never pull the trigger. You know what I mean? So many people avoid quitting their jobs and entertain the thought that over time their job is going to improve. So they're optimistic that, oh, my job will just get better. I don't need to quit. Things will be better. So using that as an excuse never to do anything because you think things will get better in your current situation. Yeah. So one thing he says that can really assist is writing down your fears. So basically just journaling, which we've talked about before too, but writing down the worst case scenario that you think can happen and just getting it all out on page and reading through it. And I think if we would all do that, we would kind of see that some of our fears are irrational.
Yeah, literally maps it out, kind of gives you a good picture of, A, B, C, D, F can happen. And then you kind of digest and you're like, actually, you know what? I could survive that. Yeah. So why not take this chance?
Yeah.
So.
And then you can even, if there's still some fears that stand out to you, then writing those what ifs out and what adjustments do you need to make in case that would happen or for that not to happen. And then ultimately just writing what the benefits are of, a pro and con list. Truly, what are your worst fears? But if the best things happened,
what are you looking to gain as opposed to some sort of small failure, which in the end ultimately is not going to really cost you that much anyway. It's not. There's so many things out there we think that are really bad, but they're really not catastrophic failures. They're just little setbacks.
Yep, absolutely. And then he said another exercise you can use is thinking about if you were fired today, which could happen to any of us. We could, in our industry, the housing market could crash, our client base could dry up. It can happen to anyone. And many of us have thought about that anyway, and we have some contingency ideas in place. So really, again, journaling about that and thinking, if I lost my job today, what would I do to get my finances under control? There's so many things you can do. You can reduce your spending, you can reduce this and that. The exact same thing can happen if you're trying to, take a mini retirement.
I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
When the robots take over and all the agents are obsolete, selling foot pics. I'm telling you.
Yeah. I'm not sure I've looked at your feet, but I'm sure
you don't want to. And no one would buy. buy. That would be one broke fool.
Yeah. Basically, it's just asking yourself, what is this costing you? What is your current life costing you financially, emotionally, and physically? And what would it cost you to continue to live that life and just keep postponing action? And honestly, I think by doing that and asking yourself, that for me is enough motivation to change things. So.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of like that point, looking at evaluating your life and what you're able to do and all that stuff. That's like you see and I like it because I have a Jeep and I like to overland and travel and stuff. I like to travel just like you do, but I like you see more and more people like are doing the van life thing.
Yeah.
This ties directly into it. So they're living a lifestyle. I'm sure they're still making money one way or the other, or they've taken a mini vacation, but they're living out of a van, minimal cost, seeing whatever it is they want to see all over the country or all over Europe or wherever, and they're just living their best life.
Some of it, it's just taking a leap of faith, and I know for some of us that's easier than others. But Lindsay and I have talked about doing this too, where we just, because our dog is getting older and our dog is our whole life, but just like taking him on an extended RV trip, 3 months, 6 months, whatever. I would be fine with like selling my car to put towards an RV and then just figuring out when we get back, things like that, just knowing that you have to stop asking yourself, what if, like to a certain degree, yes, let's be safe, all that stuff, but eventually just take the leap and know that your future self will figure it out.
Yeah.
It's going to be okay.
A matter of fact, I was talking about this book to one of my friends recently, and he was telling me a story about a guy who sold everything, all of his material possessions he had. He sold his house, sold everything, turned around, bought like a big travel van, completely converted the inside, was living outside of a Home Depot for like months on end.
Wow.
And then once he had everything ready, he just moved to Argentina. He's been living in Argentina for like a year.
That's
so it's
amazing.
like, yeah. And then, so stuff like that is, you don't have to be pinned down by what we think is like what the normal life should look like. 9 to 5, 40 hours a week or more, 2 weeks of vacation, all that good stuff, having a huge mortgage, huge car payment. You don't, that doesn't have to be the standard. This doesn't have to be the norm. You can reinvent what you think your life should look like.
Yeah. And I get that it's scary for people. I've done that twice in my life where I've literally sold everything. The first time was when I joined the Army. And again, I was 23. So, I didn't have that much, but I literally had nothing other than a few pairs of clothes that I went off to the Army with. That was an amazing adventure. And then after I got out of the Army, I was married before. And then once we got divorced, I took a job overseas in Afghanistan. Again, sold everything because not knowing how long I would be there, what my next step was. And then that job eventually brought me here. And that's when I met Lindsay, et cetera, et cetera. But those were 2 times where it absolutely paid off. And I had no baggage. I never worried about anything, any possessions, And I get that that's harder for people, especially when you have kiddos. And I'm not saying if you have 2 young kids that, this path is necessarily for you, but it's something you can think about and plan as your kids get older. Or, it's a great experience for them. I can't imagine if I had kids to take them on some of these
Well, it's just like the example I used earlier with the family with the yacht. I think, I can't remember right. I mean, I could be speaking wrong here, but I think they sold everything they had and just moved onto a boat for 6 months, sold the boat when they were done, minimal loss. And, could you imagine like how impactful that time frame was for those children to be able to see all of those different countries, to, experience all that different culture. They were still being schooled and all that stuff, but I can't imagine the impact that would have had on their entire family.
Yeah, absolutely. He brings up a point here, which I think is kind of interesting, is that he talks about how it's lonely at the top, and he says 99% of people in the world are convinced they're incapable of achieving great things, so they aim for the mediocre. And I kind of took some of this to say, like, there's actually quite a bit of room at the top then, because not very many people aim for
Absolutely.
the top.
This was actually a very powerful part of the book for me because, like you said, most people don't try because they just think that it's out of reach. Like, there's no way I can achieve that. But in reality, a huge majority of the people are thinking exactly that way. So, they're self-eliminating themselves from being at the top.
Yeah.
So the competition is actually thinner at the top than what you think it is.
So he's not saying it's lonely as in like a bad thing. He's saying there's plenty of room for those of us up there that want to be there. And he talks about how, for an example, it's easier to raise $1 million than it is 100,000. And I completely agree with that. Like, it's because most people are like, oh, I could raise $100,000. Like that would be easier. If I had to borrow 100,000, like I could ask a few people for that, but trying to go for $1 million, there's very few people asking for that amount of money. So when you do ask people, whatever it is for business, whatever, a lot of times they're going to say yes, because they're not being asked. So that was kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. Oh, and he also says it's easier to pick up the one perfect 10 in the bar than the 5 8s. Because everyone is trying for the 8 in the bar, the woman that's the 8, but nobody's trying for the 10.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you're
everyone's afraid to talk to her.
Exactly. So if you approach her, you probably are going to be able to pick her up. Mm-hmm.
It happened to me all the time.
I
would be in the bar and no one would talk to me. It was like, what is going on here? They were just all intimidated.
That's right. That's exactly it. So that kind of wraps up the first chapter, the definition chapter, but he ends it with a couple questions that we should ask ourselves. So he says, how has being realistic or responsible kept you from the life you want? And so these are just ones for our listener to kind of take away and kind of mull around, when they're driving around, to think about. How has doing what you should resulted in subpar experiences or regret for not having done something else? And look at what you're currently doing and ask yourself, what would happen if I did the opposite of the people around me? What will I sacrifice if I continue on this track for 5, 10, 20 years? I think asking yourself, like, what if you did the opposite of the people around you? That can be really hard, especially, again, if you are in kind of a traditional job. There's so many people that would never live outside of that world. It's just too scary for them. So it can be hard to kind of have the courage to be the person that does live differently.
Well, I think I think most people just kind of drone on with their lives. Mm-hmm. They don't really even realize that there are other options out there.
True.
So I think if you're the type of person or finding yourself listening to this book or reading it or are in a position and you start to ask yourself these questions, you probably are the person who needs to make a change in your life.
Absolutely. So. If you're listening to this podcast, you already... not that our podcast is something amazing, but the topics we talk about are not something that everyone is even aware of.
Person who puts their head down and works their 9 to 5 job, they don't ask themselves these questions.
Yeah, for sure. Great. Anything else you wanted to add for the first section of the book?
No, I think it was a great start. Looking forward to digging into the rest. It's just reiterate the fact that I thoroughly enjoy this book. It's very motivational, and it can apply to most everybody, even though some of the scenarios in here wouldn't fit what it is you're doing. Like, if you're like a contractor or a plumber or someone who works in, like a factory or something like that, you'll probably have a hard time employing some of these tactics, but there's still definitely stuff to take away that you can help improve your life. For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. You want to take us out?
Yeah. As always, we really appreciate all the support that we get for the show. If you like what you heard, please like, share, subscribe, leave us a comment on YouTube if you're watching us there. And we're looking forward to see you next week.
Yep. See you guys next time.
Thank you.